Hello, I'm Dr Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. It is such a joy to be reconnecting with a guest I had a conversation with back in the first year of podcasting. Golly gosh, I cannot believe it's nearly 3 full years of weekly podcasting. And as a funny little side note, when I first wanted to start the podcast, my EA said to me that did I want to consider fortnightly? Because she knew that I was in struggle town when it came to being really regular with other things like blogging and my newsletter. And I said, no, this is what I want to do. And I'm really proud because we're nearly 3 years into the podcast and haven't missed a week and don't intend on that ever happening. So back at episode 43, I interviewed the delightful, very, very wise and incredibly knowledgeable Unna Goldsworthy. And she's back with us today. Back in episode 43, we spoke about this topic, perimenopause and anxiety. And, you know, the research has developed, and Unna has, as we all are when we are so passionate about the work we do, evolved as a professional, as have I in that time. And so many of you as listeners, even if you've heard that previous conversation, you're just going to love what we're talking about today, because I know what so many of Unna's clients say is, oh my goodness, I thought it was just me. So it is an absolute delight to welcome Unna back. And Unna and I had lunch yesterday, which was very, very nice. So extra special that I get to see her 2 days in a row. Unna, thank you so much for coming back and joining us here on the podcast.
Hi, Jodi. Thank you. It's a pleasure. I'm super excited. It has been a big evolution. Conversation.
It has, hasn't it? And I guess as women, we're all a couple of years older, and so things change, you know, when it is, you know, related to perimenopause and this kind of journey. And yeah, could you, I guess, start by telling listeners who might not have heard about your work before, or heard you on my podcast or a different podcast, or been working with you, about what it is that you're really passionate about, the work that you do. And then could you tell us a bit about your story? Because I think it's just, we need to hear more stories of women on this journey, and I can share a little bit about mine as well.
Yeah, no worries. It's true, like even the theme here is refining, because there's always refining about what I do and, you know, oh, am I happy here? All those kinds of things. So there's been lots of refining. So me as a speaker and a performance coach, and still working a little bit clinically, I'm still trying to, define my why and all those kinds of things. And it always comes back to a sense of helping people with interpersonal courage and identity so that they've got really lovely scaffolding and this sense of how they operate, so that they know when to ask for help. And that's definitely been my experience as I've transitioned into phase 2 of perimenopause. And we chatted about this yesterday, where it's like our little ideas about, you know, consolidating what we do. And yes, I work with people's bodies, but that's rarely where we need to start and focus, because often there's things that have happened in this clinical world where we've come to a point, if it's not a random accident or something like that, we've come to the state of health that we're in because of the decisions that we've made. Yeah. And then if we wind back about what we want and what we want to look different in the future, we really have to be thoughtful about who we are, what is our why, what do we identify as, why do we make decisions the way we make decisions, and if they're not working for us, what can we do then to change the way we operate and make decisions? And that can be really tricky and hard. So yeah, my work is usually I'll help your body, but let's just double check what's going on in the mind as well.
Oh, it's such a beautiful way that you've framed the work that you do. And I think it's really important for us just to spend a moment just acknowledging that we are evolving, and that our interests and I've been really excited about something kind of new that's related, and I won't talk about it now because I need to develop my ideas, and it really links with the work that I've been doing. But it's exciting, and we've got that freedom to kind of really own where we're at, but also to know that we've got permission to, make change and to, as we learn more and we become, incredibly passionate about perhaps new ideas and new things that we want to sort of bring to the world or share or talk about or teach or support people with. And I shared with you yesterday that I did a kind of a bit of a not a 180, probably a bit of a 90-degree turn, because you were asking me about kind of my journey to where I am, and it's always evolving. And I think it's really nice to hear another woman talk about that it's refining. It's about refining it, and then it's okay to make change. And if you're listening and you're thinking, well, I've refined, but actually now I really want to just say full stop here and start somewhere new, that's okay as well. So I love that we get to come back together and as there's another couple of years of life and living and family and parenting and professional work for you, and to be able to have this conversation. It'd be a very different conversation, but to be able to revisit this conversation, because it's such a huge part of our lives as women. I'm 50 now. I turned 50 in April, and no matter where we are on this journey of changing hormones as women in adulthood, there's always something to learn, and there might be things about people's lives that they don't really relate to hormonal changes. So perhaps if you could share with us a bit about, what you've been going through and experiencing. And you said about stage 2 of perimenopause. So perhaps as you share your story, can you kind of unpack, because I didn't know that there were stages, and forgive me if you've shared that before, but
no, I can't remember all that time ago.
If you could tell us a bit about what you've been experiencing, and maybe a few little nuggets along the way as to kind of what that stage, what your story is kind of indicative of in terms of the stages of perimenopause, would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, like, it is, as scientists and this subject, there's more science has come out, so there's more things to talk about. And I think we can get a little bit annoyed at, well, that's just how the health industry can be so confusing, is that because there is so much evolution and we learn something and then that goes out the window, or, it was proven in a rat study but it's not proven in animals, there can be so much confusion about which way is up with these things. And that, naturally it evolves as it should for science to be effective. But it does leave the mere mortal like, oh, but I thought the answer was this. So I always want to come into this conversation with the idea of N1. So N in science or research refers to the number of subjects that are in the study. So we're talking here about N1, where you're reflecting on what this means to you with your knowledge of your body. And then, you get to go out and see where the little bits of science that are relevant to you or important to you need to be applied, and who you need to go out and ask for that support with.
Yes.
And I do think there are actually maybe 2 ways of talking about the stages of perimenopause, but I've gotten very used to the version that I think was first proposed by Professor Proctor, who's fantastic at talking about progesterone, because often estrogen gets a huge conversation in this whole transition. But she talks about the 3 stages of perimenopause. So if we make it a little bit clearer in terms of hormones in our body and their influence, hormones can influence every organ in our body pretty much, and that including our brain, and in our brain it interacts with neurotransmitters. So you always are talking about the serotonin, dopamine, GABA, and then some of the excitatory ones as well, like glutamate. So these hormones interaction have a play on also the neurotransmitters and how we process information or how we feel, even though science really doesn't understand this science of feeling either. So It's still a bit of fun. But if we go back to the first time where hormones become particularly important to us, that's called puberty 1. And in puberty 1, that's what we call our first critical window of hormone change. And in that time, there's a recalibration in our immune system. Our bones and our hearts and our brains are changing a lot in that time under the influence of new signals from our brain to our reproductive system to start churning out more of these sex hormones. And then we sort of stabilize through that time. But you can reflect on what was life like for you as a teen, and that does seem to reflect a little bit of what you might have inboard when you come into puberty too, which is perimenopause. So the other critical window where hormones then start moving around and changing, and it's pretty much the opposite. You know, in puberty 1, yes, the hormones go up and they start modeling the body. And then in puberty 2, the hill goes down. In our mid-30s, we slowly start getting less and less signaling for hormones to be sent out. And then over about a 10-year period, we come right down to this very low level of hormones in terms of the more potent version of estrogen and progesterone in our body. And we can map what happens a little bit in our mother's experience as well as what happens in our teen years, and to replicate it. And that is pretty much what I'm noticing in my experience as well. So in my teen years, I did struggle from challenges with my mental health. I wouldn't have ever said anxiety, but now when I look back, anxiety was definitely a player. I grew up in a bit of a challenging environment, so I think that really sort of pulled things up a little bit in terms of how much I struggled and with my mental health. And during that time, my mental health was represented through anorexia nervosa. So that was depression and anxiety were a big part of what sculpted my puberty. And then here I come along in my career and go, okay, you know, what's really amazing to me? And to your point at the start, I'm noticing this identity modeling that we go through in teen years.
Yes.
This has become really important to me because I feel like it's such a tricky time to be trying to figure out who you are, but then these huge hormone changes happening at the same time, constantly moving the goalposts. You know, you're trying to figure out who you are without your parents, and then you're connecting with your friends as the biggest guides, and they're trying to figure it out as well. And in my clinical space, I work particularly with teens with dysautonomias or POTS in particular. And this just makes my heart ache. It's one of those challenges where it often pops up in puberty and it really derails life. So it's a bit of a side story, but back to our original point of, you know, what's your why? And that became a continued little, like, you know, tap on the shoulder for me, is supporting people in this transition where it's, who am I and what's happening with me? And then as I was developing my support and creating courses and things for people to understand perimenopause, and particularly what that means for identity and mental health, as well as what we need to do for movement to assure our health in that final third of our life, I felt like, to some degree, a bit of a, you know, who am I to be talking to women that are older than me? You know, you have this clinically often, you're like, oh, you know, who am I? And I'm like, well, I've gone to uni for 5 years, so I've got some authority, but you still kind of challenge yourself a little bit there. And when I did that and I happily sort of sat with those ideas, I just sort of checked in and went, well, I identify as a planner, and I also want to support women in this space to be planners so they know what's coming, or also that if they're in it, you're not alone, you're not going crazy, this is happening to lots of people, and the science is only just evolving. So it's this theme of wanting to support people to feel clear on their path rather than feeling completely dismantled is this little underlying theme that's come into play. Yeah, and that's my puberty too, perimenopause. I can say now that I'm out of phase 1, and phase 1 is where we have, you know, a regular cycle still, and maybe we're getting some little subtle changes with all the other organs that our hormones influence. So it's usually like my skin cream doesn't work as well, or maybe I'm at a few changes with my sleep here or there, but they're often things that we don't think, oh, that's part of perimenopause.
Oh, yeah.
And then, yeah, they're just really, really subtle. And then fast forward to, for me, that's been happening maybe for about a year or so. And then all of a sudden, Jodi, in the last 3 or 4 menstrual cycles for me, I've gotten a really big jolt with phase 2. So from a body point of view, that means my actual cycles become a little longer. So rather than 28 days, it's kind of 35 days, and it's just kind of made that change itself.
Yes.
And the bleeding part's a little bit different. But the biggest bit for me is that what I know of my trust in myself, my competencies, my capabilities, and my character, and the things that have me feel confident and purposeful in the way that I think, have suddenly just gotten this little dark cloud over them. So a little bit more sensitive to overwhelm and anxiety, and a little bit more sensitive after I ovulate to thoughts that are very intrusive and a bit dark, and, you know, questioning, am I good enough? Am I this? And I'm so thankful for our art of acceptance and commitment therapy that I'm able to sit here and go, hang on a second, who's in my head? That's not me. That's not how I talk to myself. So I do feel a great blessing at the moment, that it has allowed me to go, oh, there's not something wrong with me. I need to move a few things around and treat myself with a little bit more care in this particular time between ovulation and my menstrual cycle, and give my family the heads up of the spaces that I need.
Yes.
And my teenage boy who's in the house, or preteen that's in the house, he's going through these changes as well. So it's this recalibration happening outside of me, but I very much have to recalibrate how I operate as well, so that I don't end up in a ditch somewhere, metaphorically.
And it's this awareness, isn't it? It's this attention to, and you used an expression yesterday, body literacy, and how tuned in are we? Because women of our age, especially if we've got children, it's I feel like I don't know that until I feel as though when my children are driving, that will change everything. But it feels like the busiest I've ever been in my life, in terms of like my own career pathway and kids, activities, and just aging parents, and trying to maintain, see my beautiful friends, and all the balls that we know, and we love all of them, but just sometimes we're struggling to sort of find a place for all of them in our days and in our weeks. And this awareness, it just requires us to have a little bit of space for ourselves, doesn't it? To be able to pay attention to what's changing. And for us, I guess we know about puberty, and we know as parents, if we want to, share a book with our children are learning about it at school, they're having seminars at school, and that there are lots of resources and things. But for us with menopause, it feels as though it's only, and perhaps it's because of my age, but it feels as though the past 5 years or so, there's been this upsurge in this willingness to talk about it, and this openness and vulnerability. It shouldn't really be vulnerability, because it's just like 50% of the population, but it does take a bit of courage, I think, to, not everyone wants to sort of talk about it. And there was a lot of shame around it, I think. What I felt was shame around it for my mum and the women that I knew when I was a kid, and it wasn't talked about, but I certainly could see externally how it was affecting my mum, and she was sort of itching and scratching to the point of bleeding, and just this, the way it affected her mood. And I don't know that she had a good understanding either. So to know what to look for, and you've talked about phase 1 being these subtle changes, and then phase 2 being, I guess a little bit more obvious perhaps. If you hadn't picked up on something in phase 1, you're more likely to notice. But then being able to kind of go, right, well, this is happening. What do I need? And what can I do to support myself? And can I do it on my own? Do I need help? So, yeah, there's so much to talk about. So, yeah, I'll let you get back to it, though, because you've been so kind in sharing kind of what you're experiencing and that you've been able to kind of really pay attention, especially not only to what's happening in your body, but to how you're thinking as well. And we know that mental health can be a really noticeable, there can be a noticeable change in mental health around this time of our life as well.
Yeah, the statistics are quite big in terms of, and I think an important thing to pause and earmark is the idea that what's happening in our body in perimenopause is a neurological change, and within that, the mental health component of it means that there's a huge jump in anxiety and depression by, I believe it's 45 to 55% just within that window of, about our 40s through to our 50s. And that I think since 2017, I'm a shocker with numbers, if you can't tell with the all moments. But I believe since 2017, there's been a significant jump in suicides during that time. So I'm so glad that people are having the conversation, and I'm so glad that the mental health general conversation is coming up stronger and stronger. But yeah, being really clear on that this is a symptom of perimenopause, because where that becomes really important is when I go to my doctor and start asking for help, or when it's happening to me, I get to go, oh, this isn't a moral or character, issue of mine. This is part of where I am in life, and there's lots of support. And that often when we go to GPs, the response might be to kind of jump towards antidepressants and things, whereas the conversation we might want to also add in is, I've also been noticing changes in my body. I think I'm going through the start of perimenopause. So that appropriate conversations about hormone replacement therapy can come into play as well. Because there's those two options together, or one or the other might be the solution, rather than thinking that it's all one way in terms of medications required.
Yes, and I think too, what you were just saying, and I really want to come back to HRT or hormone replacement therapy, because I know that the science has really changed because there was a huge risk of cancer associated with HRT a long time ago when I was seeing my mum and her friends going through menopause. It was a really big issue. But the fact that just having the awareness, I think about my own experience. And I was saying to you, wasn't I, before we got recording, that I know that, I feel a bit guilty saying so, but I kind of didn't even realise it was kind of happening until it was already, like, I was postmenopausal, and it was only because I'd had blood tests, routine kind of blood tests for my iron and thyroid and various other kind of markers that I get tested annually, cholesterol, sugars, triglycerides, all of that. And my doctor was sort of going through, check, talking to herself, postmenopausal, and I'm like, hang on. Just rewind there for a second. What? Postmenopausal? What? But, and in that moment, it was like a really sinking, I was rapt on one hand because I was sort of thinking, wow, but also really there was a bit of a devastation feeling as well. Like it was, I wasn't able to unpack it sort of then and there. It's only kind of reflecting on it. But I do look back and think about night sweats and extremely heavy periods for which I ended up having an ablation. But I've since learned, because my mum had an ablation, so I knew it was an available option. But I didn't know that a change in menstrual flow was a sign of perimenopause. I'm 50, and this was probably in the last 6 years. And not once in any of the conversations that I had with any of my medical practitioners around this heavy bleeding was perimenopause even raised. So interesting.
Yeah, and it's a big indicator. It's not what's happening in my body, but it's what's happening in your body. And it's like it ultimately any kind of changes within that, time frame, it should be a light bulb moment for the medical person that you're talking to. And again, of course, I don't know the numbers, but not that long ago, there was the menstrual cycle was put onto the list of things that need to be considered as vital functions. So, our blood pressure, our heart rate, our consciousness, these are things that medical people are checking for when they're checking on our health. And now our menstrual cycle is added onto that. So it's still evolving in terms of people's ability to go, that makes me think of, these things over here that could be in play as well.
Yes.
And I guess maybe in a little bit of the back of my purpose is that, I'm not particularly a women's specialist, but I know what I need to know to support women in the way that is specific to them. Yes. So it's where I can't have a 45-year-old male and a 45-year-old woman in a clinic with me talking about the same, general things and not be thinking about the specifics of what's happening in her female-specific physiology versus his male-specific physiology. So it's, I think there's a little bit of a, hey, to the allied health world, that needs to be on the radar because it changes so much in terms of the way we approach mental health, for example, the conversations and openness that should be happening, the way we adjust exercise, inflammation and system, all the other organs that are influenced by hormones. That I think it's a big thing for. It should be on people's lens. You shouldn't have to be a specialist to be clear on the specifics that we should be looking at.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And and that's why the work, it's so interesting. I've never told you this, but even before, because for listeners might recall that I've had Craig Harper on the podcast a couple of times, and he has his the You Project and Life with Craig Harper, and Unna and I have both been guests for Craig multiple times. But even before I knew, Unna, that you had done that same work with Craig, because you start to sort of listen and you get to know some of his his regular guests and who he really respects and loves chatting with and bringing to his community. But I'd even had, because we're both on the Mornington Peninsula, local people kind of out of the blue just kind of raise your name in even with our daughter when she was having her headaches, and this was years ago, would say, Unna, you should go and see Unna. Unna is the person the person to see about, especially because my daughter's now 14, and they were probably obviously connecting your expertise and the work that you do and your focus on girls and women with the issue that we were having no luck with. And so so it's you're the knowledge and the expertise and the kindness that you bring to this as well, and especially you are going through it, but we don't have to have had, surgeon doesn't have to have broken their arm to be able to repair a broken arm, but it does certainly lend a different perspective and a different lens when you're on that road yourself. And if I had have had someone say to me, talk to me about my periods and talk to me about what it meant and do some, maybe some more hormone checks, although they're a time stamp. It's a time stamp with hormones and they're always fluctuating. So it's a bit tricky to kind of nail down exactly what's happening. But over time we could have probably painted quite a neat little picture, and I might have decided to wait perhaps and manage what was happening rather than thinking, this has just got to stop. This has just got to stop. Yeah. So an ablation, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a lasering of the lining of the uterus. And within months of having that, I never had a period again. And so therefore that's probably why I wasn't able to see that I was going through menopause, because periods had stopped a long time ago. And so, of course, that would be an obvious sign that I didn't have to refer to. But you mentioned about exercise changing? I'm really interested to know more about that. Could you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, and I think we have to start by honouring like how important our hormones are to the health of our system. So estrogen, for example, it's our version of testosterone in the sense that it helps us to maintain really strong muscle. Progesterone's amazing in terms of managing our parasympathetic nervous system and our sense of calm, and they've got this beautiful dance going on constantly. But in amongst that, there's a balance of inflammation and anti-inflammation going on in the body with those two kind of key hormones. And as we go through perimenopause, because those rhythms against each other are less predictable, so the amount of estrogen or progesterone dropping down lower or quicker than normal, we start to see more sort of total inflammation in our system. So when we kind of zoom out and look at it that way, the inflammation changes how we can load our muscles and ligaments. So what the amount of exercise we used to be able to do might not work so well for us in a few ways, but mostly that our body needs more time to recover from loads. So we start to go through these really interesting transactions so I know for me personally, when I'm feeling hotter and the sort of internal dialogue is a bit trickier, I've got a sense that I'm kind of on a higher or lower part of the roller coaster, we call it, like this big jumping around version of hormones. And that's my aha moment that I just need to pull back a little bit and just recheck how much time I need off between my key training sessions, like strength training or cardio training, because what I want to avoid is training in the grey. So this is an idea where my body is actually very tired and isn't recovering very well. So when I go to the gym and everything feels hard and effortful, it's not hard and effortful because I'm working at 100% where I'm meaning to work. It's hard and effortful because my body is very tired. So I'm actually training at about 40% and then driving my inflammatory markers and my cortisol levels up. And then it becomes this really vicious loop. And usually what women respond to is that our bodies start laying down body fat in different areas as our estrogen types change. So we go to our, what we've been taught of control your body with exercise and, stay a certain size of jeans. And then we start bossing our body around by doing more exercise. And then we end up making the situation worse because our glucose sensitivity becomes quite different during perimenopause as well. So then we end up tired, muscularly exhausted. Maybe we're not into our exercise anymore because we just feel so tired. And then also we get this sort of double layering of now we've got a cortisol version of laying down body fat in different places. So it can be a bit of an ego trip for people that are used to exercising at high levels with a lot of volume. They might need to really twig their recovery processes and their nutrition to keep that volume up.
Yes.
And it might be quite, from an identity point of view, quite tricky to slow down and not, have this inner dialogue of, I'm not doing good enough and I'm not doing enough, or, sometimes we do use exercise to what we would call pseudo accept our feelings, and that when we do less of it, then we're dealing with more feelings and then we don't feel good about that. So it's quite amazing how, we can talk about exercise from, a bone or a muscle or an immune or a nervous system point of view. My favorite is immune system and nervous system point of view, and that when we prescribe exercise based on that in perimenopause, we tend to do better. When we prescribe based on, how much we need to do to make big muscles, we tend to look at the male version of exercising, and that doesn't suit what our nervous system is recalibrating in that time. So shifting the lens of what we're training becomes really important to me in that time.
Golly, it's I was driving this morning. I had an osteo appointment I've got a niggly Achilles tendon, right? I was talking on the phone to a friend, and she goes, good old age-related injury. Anyway, I didn't know whether or not, I've never researched the Achilles tendon in terms of age of challenges. I know it's it can be overused, but as you're talking and I'm listening, I can't help but sort of think about how this obviously applies to me, and because I've always loved really high intensity kind of hard work, whereas I know instinctively I would probably, and you know, this is not personal counselling for Jodi, but I do CrossFit. I love my CrossFit. I love feeling and being strong and building my strength and my skills, but I really there's a part of me that knows that I probably need something more like yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I walk the dog, and Peter and I get out for a walk and things like that. But it's so interesting because I'm sort of making these connections as you're talking, and I'm realising that, you know, I do CrossFit 3 times a week. I tried to go to 4 times a week. I found it too hard. I just couldn't recover enough. And so I feel like I should be doing more, you know, isn't it funny? So I wonder if other listeners are sort of like really identifying with that as well. So how can we
really boss ourselves around with exercise, and it's not helpful. And I think that's a bit of a fitness industry thing that you need to, you know, there's a certain standard that you need to move to. But I'm so glad that you mentioned your Achilles, because it's definitely a load thing. The biomechanist in me goes, why the left Achilles and not the right Achilles? So that's a whole nother conversation. And then, but very much to your point, so estrogen, our tendons and our brains are very estrogen hungry. So when we've got estrogen on board, it helps us be really pliable in our tendons. And that's a whole nother conversation in terms of, you know, like female alpha football, and when they strain and sprain things more commonly based on their menstrual cycle. But to your point, in menopause, perimenopause, we're more sensitive to overuse, but in terms of like itises. So Achilles tendonitis and frozen shoulders, really, really common. Plantar fasciitis. So we're changing the makeup of the connective tissue as the hormones change. So you literally need to recalibrate the modeling of how your tissue responds to the exercise, rather than, you know, not exercising for 5 years, my body starts changing, and then I go back and do everything I used to do. And it's hard for people to start slow with exercise, but ultimately that's the thing. We've got to reintroduce to the tendons, or there's a mobility thing going on here. This is different. And then when we get post-menopause, our tendons, the fascia thickens around the tendons, both in males and females. So that's less pliable. And that, interestingly, our fascia communicates to our nervous system on a fight or flight side of our nervous system, the sympathetic part of our nervous system. But also our tendons are much stiffer than what we were used to. So we were used to really lovely, pliable tendons, and now we've got more like a male profile of tendons and those types of soft tissue. So we end up having what we call, quote unquote, male type injuries. So Achilles tears, groin tears, things that don't usually pop up in female injuries. Yeah.
So
I'm glad you mentioned your Achilles.
So interesting. And yeah, anyway, I mean, I play basketball once a week. I'm going to take a couple of weeks off because I really just need to sort of like reduce the load and let, you know, get this to heal. But I really miss netball, and I think all the time about going and playing. And then I think I've been so lucky. I've never really had a major injury with netball knees or anything like that. And I just think maybe just quit while I'm ahead. But it's this identity change, and I really want to talk about this because I train with a lot of women, and have a lot of, lovely friends that I talk to, and, so many of us are still trying to hold on to what we used to do and think and train and exercise, and we don't feel older in ourselves. We don't, I still feel 25. Obviously my body's aging and I really want to look after it. I love being strong. I have a daughter that talks about doing strength training so she can be strong. And I know that that's because of what she sees with me. I know I'm role modeling for her. I want my bones to be strong and I want to still be fit and able to do all the things. But for me to change what I'm doing, it almost feels like I'm giving into aging, even though it's the kindness that I need. And I really do need to think, and after our conversation today, I really will take some time to really think about and maybe even make an appointment to see you to sort of think about, right, even though in my head this is what's keeping me, quote unquote, young in my mind, because I can still do, is it what's best? And how do you help women kind of come to terms, I guess, with the changes we need to make? Because it's one thing to know what's helpful and what we might be at risk of if we don't make change. But, that's a big shift, isn't it, when it changes how we see ourselves?
And we definitely do, like that whole idea of how do we work with people, and it's always about, and this is what listeners can do as well from that N1 point of view, is zoom right out and go, I want to keep playing netball, but what do I do slightly differently to make sure that my body can recover? Because we often think about exercise as recovering just about exercise, but our stress levels impact our immune and our nervous system as well, and they interplay with how well we recover from exercise. So we can't just look at ourselves as, this, hour at the gym, or we've got to zoom right out and go, okay, what else is impacting your immune and your nervous system that allows, if we do adjustments here and a little bit of specific stuff around your sport, how do we keep you playing? Because we want you to be playful and adventurous. We don't want you to lose that. And the dynamics of netball and the dynamics of basketball are so deeply important for bone health as well, and loading with strength training. That's one of the biggest things. And interestingly, I'll drop this in as a side note. There's another hormone called osteocalcin, and this is developed in the bone. And when we have a change in osteocalcin, that's been correlated with upregulation of anxiety. So poor bone density is associated with changes in the way we process serotonin, GABA in our memory center, in our fear center, and in our brainstem, which is also where the cues for our breathing come from. So, and then another little loop is hyperventilation and how that slowly degrades bone. And then there we are with a really interesting loop between bone anxiety and how we breathe, which is, it's a really interesting loop to tie into. But the identity game is big, and I think we need to pause and have a moment where, what does perimenopause mean to me? And if someone were to ask you, what does it mean? There would be an array of, a slide of, fantastic, I can't wait to not have a period anymore, to, I'm grieving the loss of that cycle. That's how I connected to my body and I knew my rhythm. It might be this identity thing of age. It feels like aging to me. And we know in our culture a little bit, we're a bit of an ageist culture. So, and the amazing Valerie Alexander, people can look up her TED Talk. She does a biased TED Talk, and she talks about how, in particularly in corporate worlds where we get to a certain age and we become redundant. And that is, to your point earlier, we're climbing our career ladder. We get to the top and we're climbing it through perimenopause, putting more and more challenges on ourselves. And this is where I kind of land with my corporate coaching, is how do we do this gracefully with our body, get really clear on identity so we get to keep climbing that ladder of who we want to be without being rattled by these concepts that don't really relate to our sense of purpose and ourselves. That this is not aging for us. This is us moving into a new steadiness in our stride. And I will share with you the grandmother theory. Have you heard of the grandmother theory?
No.
So you know that how we get given the Darwinism theory of evolution and why we've sort of come to the way we are.
Yes.
And I can't remember who said this, but it's quite funny because I remember their voice in my head, but I can't remember who said it. And they said, oh, Darwin didn't really like females very much. And there's another version of our evolution theory that's more interesting around this idea about perimenopause, is that ultimately with our genes, when we age, we aren't great at reproducing fantastic, healthy humans. So the older we get, male and female anatomy, making little ones, we don't make healthy humans. So it makes sense that our genes would turn off the ability to reproduce. So we start to say, hey, this isn't actually a celebration into our next phase. And the sciences are leading up to this as well, is that, as we've kind of alluded to, anxiety is higher in females in this transition. But then as we clock forward into the next bit, and there's some amazing research around estrogen receptors in the brain at the moment, and that they actually are still alive and lit up in the brain for more years than we thought they were. Then when we get past into that postmenopause, anxiety levels drop. And in the grandmother theory, this becomes that you become the kind, calm, level-headed person that everyone else comes to. You become like a bit of a guardian, the one who's like, oh, no need to worry about that. Or, that person that's at the top of the ladder from a genetic point of view, not with all these sort of triggers and challenges going on. You've lived your life and you're a bit of an oracle now. So that's the grandmother theory of evolving through this period, which I hope gives everyone some relief and just a little bit of, a bit of a warm glow around the idea that this is not just an aging process.
And also that, for want of a better expression, there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, absolutely. And we get to reframe, and a lot of women in post-menopause, or even in the transition of menopause, they talk about getting clear on what they really want. So there might be some challenges, but they start to get really clear on who they want around them, where they want their focus to really be, and where they need to kind of, lock down and to return to my kind of idea of, where do I need my scaffolding? What do I need to know and be confident in myself to, for the next third of my life, and what I want that to look like. So it is a light at the end of the tunnel. I like that phrase for this.
And it is certainly something that comes with age, and I don't know if it's simply because the bandwidth is less, there's less time and less space, but I and my friends and I talk about this, and I read other women talking about this, I remember Oprah talking about it when she was 40, and I thought that was ancient when I was a kid, Oprah turned 40, I was like, oh my goodness, she's so old. But just this idea that you are more sure about yourself. And for me, who was a lifelong sort of people pleaser, I'm more assertive now. I'm still as kind and warm-hearted as I've always been, but I am protective of myself and mindful of what I do want to do and what I don't want to do, and I do a whole lot less of what I don't want to do these days. There's a lot of things I have to do that I'd rather not, but when it comes to, requests or being asked for things, or just, in general, I'm just clearer on my boundaries and firmer and better at holding them, which I once wasn't. And I really feel as though that's just a maturity and a confidence and a self-assuredness that's come over time, which is a gift. That's been a really great part about, getting older. That, I know that's N of one, but
I would love to credit a little bit of that, because I would think of you as the smiling ox. So you're warm, approachable, but you're really sturdy in your boundaries. But I would love to credit a lot of that to the skills of acceptance and commitment therapy, because when I'm coaching women, particularly in groups, it's really interesting to me about how people can get themselves in a real overthinking loop where they get themselves really, really stuck and really pulled away from their sense of what they want and their values. And that, ironically, that this is part of this. We get a little bit more rising up of the amygdala as, estrogen levels change, and we're a little bit closer to worry and fear. So that body literacy that we talked about again, how do I know this is happening to me, rather than it taking me into an argument or having me spend 5 hours on something that don't need to spend 5 hours on. Like, what are my triggers to know that, I've been pulled somewhere that is not anywhere on the degrees of my, quote unquote aeroplane of life landing at the airport that I want it to. Yeah, there won't be a day that we don't celebrate that.
I know. And now that you've said that, I think daily I'm using those skills, and they're so ingrained, and they're so very much a part of just the way that I think. I always loved my brother years and years and years ago. He said, when I became a parent, he said, we don't, I don't know, it wasn't like a one-off thing. It was in conversation, but he said something about, we don't teach our kids what to think, we teach our kids how to think. And I know ACT taught me how to think. And so when something crops up, and it might ruffle my feathers a little bit, or I might feel as though to say yes would be placating, but it's really not what I want to do. I'm really good at coming back to my values, and then, obviously making the decision I want to make about whatever situation it is, and then dealing with the thoughts that might crop up that might be, I hope I haven't upset them, and then I can just notice it. Is it helpful? No, I can diffuse. And really, really powerful. So I'm really glad that you raised that, because I think when something's really ingrained and really part of the fabric of who you are after a lot of time of studying and using different techniques and living and breathing something, you forget that you're using it. You forget that you're
absolutely.
using it.
And this is like, when I would be amiss for me not to mention that, this time that I'm experiencing now from ovulation to my menstrual cycle, where my inner dialogue is really different to normal. And just so listeners know, that's much more common in people with ADHD, where they get a lift in what's called PMDD. It's a sort of version of mental challenges in terms of mental health. As these are when my skills in ACT, like, this is when I work them the hardest. And when I come and go, okay, what does my nervous system need? When do I feel triggered? I can't squeeze that extra meeting in and not expect to be like really exhausted and not being able to tolerate my kids at 8 o'clock at night when they won't go to bed. Like, this is like, and I think this is where body literacy, understanding your menstrual cycle, knowing where you're at from other neurological levels and stresses becomes like a really interesting part of the pie. But ACT becomes just this tool that you come back to and go, well, I've got to make a decision, and I need to know how I'm going to go about it. And it's just, I don't know. I need a T-shirt.
What would it say? What would it say?
Oh, I need to, gosh, ACT for life. No, I need to go into like the Hexaflex and figure out like some kitschy ones around diffusion or something. But
yeah, we both love it. We both use it personally, which is obviously the very, very best way to learn anything is to apply it. And I've shared so much of that here on the podcast, and will continue to do so. And I just love that in this conversation today, you've been able to. And I have got one more thing I want to ask you. Have you got time for me to ask you one more thing?
Yeah.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Oh, thanks so much, Unna. I was just going to say, it's so interesting, isn't it, how as we evolve as women and as professionals and as parents and as people, I know that, even just listening to you today and having this conversation, and, I wrote down bone, anxiety and breathing, and obviously osteoporosis is something that is a consideration, and bone strength and health. And I did want to ask you, for anybody who, like me, is thinking, bone strength is so important, could you share a little bit or shine a little bit of light on perhaps what we can think about in terms of our bone strength. And I guess the other thing I wanted to ask was, with your own nervous system, with what you're experiencing, with intrusive thoughts, and when you're noticing this sort of more sympathetic drive in your system as a result of the changes in your hormone profiles, just maybe one practical idea that people could take away if they're noticing that within themselves, just a suggestion of a technique to maybe put into practice. So bones and nervous system in 2 minutes. Go.
Okay.
No, you don't have to. You can take longer than 2 minutes, but I don't want to keep you too much longer.
No, you're right. So bone, definitely from the exercise point of view, it's strength training. So when we load our bone with things that are heavy and tricky to move, the forces create enough stress on the bone, and stress being a positive thing. Stress is not always a bad thing. That is that stimulates the bone to rebuild itself. Also, for those that it's safe and appropriate landing, so netball, for example, landing, and so plyometric-based training. And plyometrics is interesting. There's some studies where they look at the idea that plyometrics would be coming up off the ground and landing in a controlled fashion. But there are studies that show that you don't actually have to jump. So for some people with pelvic floor challenges, or they're working through that to be able to return to exercise, you can just do the, coming up fast part, which is about power, and you don't actually have to do the come off the ground and land part, and that's effective for bone as well. And a recent study looked at strong forms of yoga, so yoga where you're holding strong positions, but some of them are more relaxing and just quiet and gentle positions. So we want the stronger positions, and they have shown you need to practice them continuously, but they do show to improve bone as well. And then in general, from a food and stress point of view, needing to keep and manage your inflammation. So that's, that's the broader, more gentle things like how much stress is on board, how's my sleep, and am I eating foods that keep my body in a balance in inflammatory states as well. Yeah, because histamine can be a little bit tricky in perimenopause as well, and things like alcohol, not great. And then our friend, the nervous system, I think that let's do like the absolute easiest. And sometimes people are like, oh, it wasn't fantastic or fantastical or amazing or new, so it's, I won't bother, but I'll ask you to let that thought diffuse and come into the discomfort of something just being really easy. When I notice when I am unregulated. So I'll have particular responses to my partner, which I know are not towards the way I want to be. I can feel it in my body in particular ways. So there'll be tension usually through my abdominal. And then also I notice that I can't stick to one task. I start jumping a bit like a rabbit between burrows. So I kind of have a really clear library of things that I know to look out for. And when I do that, I just take one little second to pause. I do a little quick progressive muscle relaxation. So I just squeeze my fist. I wriggle my jaw to make sure that it's not, lifted up. I check on my shoulders, make sure they're just sitting on my body like a coat. They're not being held back or up or anything. And then I just pop the tongue on the roof of my mouth. I breathe in for 5 seconds through my nose, and I breathe out for 5 seconds through my nose. And I just take 1 or 2 minutes to do that. But on the exhale, I think about a word that feels outwardly projected. So it might be open or thankful or peace. It's something that's it's a zoom out word. And then after I've done that, I just kind of regroup and notice that I feel different, and then kind of regroup. What's the most important thing, as our friend Carly would say, as things as they are, what needs to be done now. Yeah. And but long game, I try to have some breath work even in my practices in terms of my exercise. I properly down-regulate after exercise. I don't just rush off to the next thing, and very much make sure that I'm the type of person that will get super stressy and forget to eat. So, yeah, really important for me to keep my glucose levels controlled, make sure I have a lunch break, make sure I'm hydrated so I don't get reverse anxiety driving me as well. So body to brain rather than brain to body. Yeah.
Yes. Unna, you are just such a delight to talk to, and I've just so loved our conversation, and the time has flown and we've gone well over. So thank you. Love to have you back on the podcast again. We're going to come back to this bones breathing anxiety note that I took. So how can people work with you? Please share your website. Please follow Unna on Instagram as well. You're always really beautifully sharing, what you're learning and how you're working with your clients on Insta as well. I see it on LinkedIn. How can people work with you and find you?
Yeah, clinically, if you jump on the website, I do a little bit of clinical work still, and that's either in Northcote in Melbourne or on the Mornington Peninsula. So there's a little contact me page on my website, which is unnamovement.com. But for corporate training or speaking, so corporate coaching, which is not just about perimenopause, by the way, is reach out on LinkedIn or, as you said, have a little look on Instagram and, reach out to chat.
Yeah, thank you. And just for anyone who's thinking, I'd love you to come in and speak to the team, what are some of the other topics that you speak on?
Yeah, so one of my favourite things to talk about is the physiology of your story. So figuring out, why we make decisions and the feedback from our body and, how we can manage that and really get clear on which way we're going in our purpose and our leadership. We can go topics-wise and look at sleep. We can look at breath work as a breath science practitioner and how we use those skills to improve our leadership as well. So, just kind of in that world of how do we regulate our nervous system, hot topic at the moment is supporting people to either avoid burnout or get out of burnout. Managing overwhelm and things like that are often the conversations that I'm having with corporate teams. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, brilliant. Wonderful. Thank you, Unna, so much. Again, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jodi. It was great.
Thank you, listeners. Thank you for joining us. Oh, goodness. Fellas, if you've stayed with us, well done. Little round of applause. You'll always learn something here about the ladies in your life as well as yourself, depending on the episode. But, we can tell this one was a lean towards supporting the women who are listening. But, please think about what you've learned from my conversation with Unna, because there are so many things that we can put into place to really support ourselves as we are going through puberty too, and the different phases of perimenopause, and menopause being a single day where we no longer have 12 months to the date of the last period is the day of menopause. It's a single day, whereas perimenopause is the process. So I thank you for your time. Really, really thank you for your community, and can't wait to be back again next week with another wonderful guest. So I'll see you then. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.